Okay, how close do I need to have this? Is this close enough? Okay. I was originally supposed to do this last year sometime. What do I want to say? Fate intervened? Lewis would say, Ransom would say, Malodil intervened and thought otherwise. So I want to just, for a couple of moments, do a very brief refresh because we're doing Perelandra, not starting. We're doing Perelandra, all of it, tonight. Hopefully within about 2 hours, and then leave time for questions. Maybe an hour and a half. Leave some time for questions. Out of the Silent Planet, the first novel in the series, ends with Ransom, Weston, and Divine taken before the Oyarsa, the ruling angel of Malacandra, aka Mars, and we hear some interesting things there. This is going to lead us into tonight's. The Oyarsa of Mars, let's just call him Mars. Mars says that Weston is not lost. And by lost, I mean damned. There is still something in him that is redeemable. Divine is lost. Divine is damned. Only thing that motivates him is greed. Weston, at least, has a love for something. It's not money, it's love for his species. And he says because of that, that is what? That is a focus on something else, a focus on the other, not on himself. Because of that, he's not lost, okay? So jump from there now to this novel. So just have that in the back of your mind. Remember, Weston's an astrophysicist, well, we would call him today an astrophysicist. He's a physicist. He's the one who came up with the means to fly to Mars, the whole 9 yards. This novel, now written, so Out of the Silent Planet, 1938. This novel, I've got the dates in front of me somewhere, 1943, I think it was. One of the things I always do whenever I'm teaching is if I'm dealing with an author who's written a lot, I try to, at some point, instruct those I'm teaching, what else is the author writing and how does that inform? Okay, so Lewis writes that in 43, Out of the Silent Planet in 38, Perelandra 43, Hideous Strength in 45, all right? Back up a little bit. 1938, Out of the Silent Planet. 1940, Problem of Pain. Okay? Dealing with very, very similar issues. But Problem of Pain is written from an entirely nonfiction, prosaic, argumentative, propositional truth kind of perspective. Preface to Paradise Lost in 1941. Okay? Little thin book, hugely important. And it's because he writes Preface to Paradise Lost in 1941, I pretty much think, that he writes Perelandra in 1943. Perelandra is Lewis's attempted correction of Milton's portrayal of God. Okay? Milton portrays God in a certain fashion in Paradise Lost. Lewis takes that and reverses it. He makes his portrayal of Malodil the opposite. And I'll get to that when we get to the all-important, I think the most crucial chapter in this novel is chapter 11. It's all about ransom. Okay? So, Preface to Paradise Lost in 1941. Weight of Glory, a sermon that he delivers in June of 1941, right after the Battle of Britain. Packed. The St. Mary Magdalene Church on the High Street in Oxford. It was standing room only. Probably one of the most profound things Lewis ever wrote. And it's not that long. It's just, sometime read it and talk about it. Screw Tape, 1942. Okay? Broadcast Talks, the first of what are going to be the 3 parts of Mere Christianity. 1942, Christian Behavior, 1943. Abolition of Man, 1943. Abolition of Man is the nonfiction, prosaic version of That Hideous Strength. Okay? Beyond Personality, the final part of Mere Christianity, 1944, and then That Hideous Strength again, 1945. All of these are about these same issues, bubbling up, suffusing each other, okay? I wrote on an outline of the books, and I don't know if I want to share it with you. I'll share it with you real briefly, and then we'll jump into Perelandra. I think this novel can be looked at as having three main divisions, okay? First part, chapters 1 through 6, all right? So, there's an intro, chapters 1 through 2. What happens in 1 through 2? Most of it is Lewis walking to Ransom's cottage. What happens on that walk? Quickly. I mean, within like the first page and a half, he starts feeling this headwind, right? Something's telling him, don't go, don't go. He finally makes it. We'll get to that very briefly in a moment, okay? And then the end of that passage, those chapters, he travels to Perelandra and he returns about a year and a half later, if I remember correctly, okay? Those two chapters have a lot of foreshadowings, all right? That's chapters 1 through 2. Arrival on the planet of Venus, Perelandra, and talking with the green lady. Her name is Tenedro, by the way. Those are chapters 3 through 6. So he arrives, he finds out it's a water world, he thinks he's going to drown, he doesn't drown. He has this Edenic experience, pre-fall, Edenic experience. He meets this green lady, talks. She learns from him, he learns from her, okay? Everything's fine. I put in a parentheses in my little note here. This is the beginning of Ransom's education, okay? Or his de-education. Well, what I noted was Ransom begins to unlearn reason. He begins to learn / experience the presence of God. Ransom is going to tell us, I'm a Christian, I believe in Jesus, the Holy Spirit, Trinity. It's this kind of knowledge. It is an intellectual assent. There's little to be seen of it in here, okay? So that first part, chapters 1 through 6. The second section is chapters 7 through 14. Okay? Chapters 7 through 10 are the temptation of the green lady by, I'm going to use the name he gets given later in the book, the Unman. Notice that. I think it's brilliant on Lewis's part. The opposite of man. Okay? That's 3 chapters. Ransom has a part in that, but most of it is the Unman and the green lady. My little comment in parentheses is interminable argument. Why? Because in chapter 2, I think it is, the character Ransom tells C.S. Lewis, the character C.S. Lewis, not the real one, that devils love interminable argument. They will wear you down with it. Okay? So, Ransom's temptation is chapter 11. That entire chapter is about Ransom's internal or spiritual state. Ransom experiences / submits to the presence of God. Okay? That's chapter 11. The battle, chapters 12 through 14. This is Ransom's spiritual / physical warfare. It's both spiritual and physical. Chapter 11 is more spiritual. 12 through 14 are primarily physical, which he really has a problem with initially. And then section 3, the final section, chapters 15 through 17, it's the beginning. It's the new dawn. It's the new day. It's the day we were supposed to have, but don't. Here, not yet. It's the beginning at the end, to use another analogy, of the last battle. It's the children waking up after the train crash. Okay? Ransom sees it's also the great dance, as the two Oyarisu, Malacandra and Perelandra, tell him. It's the great dance. Ransom sees with the, I'm going to use an Orthodox term, the nous, the spiritual heart. He experiences with the heart the great dance. The question becomes, what is the great dance? There's another term for it. In fact, I'm going to refer to a Roman philosopher, Christian Roman philosopher of the 6th century. Because the more and more I thought about this today, I was going back through and, I've got all these sticky notes. These are from the last time I actually taught this. But I've also got pages, a lot of underlining. I started going through and highlighting the underlining to make it clear to me. And one of the things, as I was doing that and putting other notes in, because every time I read it, Lewis is like an onion. You just peel the layers deeper and deeper. How many of you ever heard the name Boethius? Oh, good, great. Well, maybe I won't go off in that. The work is very Boethian. It's very Platonic. There's a reason why Lewis says throughout Chronicles of Narnia, it's all there in Plato. What do they teach children, these days in schools? Okay? So I've also divided, and this is where I'm going to get on less solid ice. Those 3 sections, the first part, purification. The second part, illumination. The third part, deification. But in one sense, if you consider just that chapter 11, that chapter 11 is Ransom's version, essentially, of the Divine Comedy. Or, let me put it another way. The entire novel, in a sense, is a comedy. Not comedy like we think based on modern television. Classical comedy, the kind of comedy that Aristotle wrote about, though we don't have his lost treatise on comedy. Comedy is the opposite of tragedy. If you were diagramming, how tragedy and how comedy works. Tragedy works, you can use a pyramid. Over here is the beginning. The action gets complicated. It rises. You get conflict and everything. And at the apex of that pyramid, you have the climax of the play. You have where something is revealed about the tragic hero. Oedipus killed his father, slept with his mother. His children are his sister and brothers, all that kind of stuff. And the rest of the play is all the unraveling. The unraveling there meaning it all falls apart. Tragedies always end in sorrow. Comedies are the exact opposite, other than the structure being the same but flipped. They start here, you have a rupture in society, everything falls apart, and at that point of climax, it could easily become a tragedy, depending on what happens. But in a comedy, it's at that point, that greatest emotional point in the entire play, that the healing begins. Usually, our greatest examples of comedies are Shakespeare's romantic comedies. In the romantic comedies, it's at that point where those budding romances can get blown apart, where fathers can intervene with stopping their daughters from marrying the men they want, or, as in Romeo and Juliet, not a comedy, tragedy, the other one, or those unions get blessed, and you end up at the end of a comedy with society being restored. Almost everyone in Shakespeare, always all but one of the people at the end of the play are happy. Shakespeare always has his malcontent. There's always one person who's not happy with what's going on. Why? Because there's always someone in society who's not happy with what's going on. Okay? This novel acts very similar as a comedy, not a tragedy. We're going to reach a point And Lewis is going to tell us what that point is, where it's like the whole future of the world rests on a knife point. Okay? We'll talk about that when we get to it. Okay, so let me put this aside. I haven't had to do this before holding the mic. So if you brought the book, and it doesn't matter if you didn't, I'm not going to talk about all the passages that I have highlighted, because you would never go home. It begins with his walking towards Ransom's cottage. We don't know exactly why. We just know he's got a meeting there. He finally makes it. He feels all of this frustration. He feels fear. He doesn't know why. He thinks reason says he should turn around, go back home, but he soldiers on. Okay, he marches on through. And when he gets to Ransom's house, he goes in, it's dark, bangs his knees on something, and he finds a note. I'm skipping a bunch that I normally would cover. He finds a note, and the note tells him that he had to make it, he had to go up to Cambridge or something like that, make yourself at home, etc. Okay? And he starts to think about what happened before with Ransom. That is the trip to Malacandra. And he's wondering, how is this related? Okay? Ransom arrives, and on page 23, we're told. So, Ransom arrives, calms Lewis down, and he says, well, it looks like things are afoot. Sorry, page 23 is in the small paperbacks. They should be the same, I think. And he asks Lewis, he says, do you remember that stuff we talked about? And he says, yes. Well, it does really look as if something of the sort were afoot. For one thing, the two sides, as you call them, have begun to appear much more clearly, much less mixed here on Earth. You know, when's this happening? World War II. I mean, the lines are pretty clearly drawn at the beginning of World War II. You got to be pretty dense to not, see good, bad, etc. In our own human affairs, to show us something a little more like their true colors. Okay? Lewis is like, yeah, I get that. They keep talking. Ransom says, when the Bible used that very expression about fighting with principalities and powers and depraved hypersomatic beings at great heights, poor translation, he says, by the way, it meant that quite ordinary people were to do the fighting. In other words, not saints, not spiritual warriors, us. Okay? And so he says, I'm being sent back to Perelandra, or I'm being sent to Perelandra. So he goes on and talks about our Eldilla, the angels, the angelic beings down here on Earth, are moving and afoot. And there are still some good ones also that are around. And something is building to a head. Doesn't know quite what it is, but he does know he's being sent to Malacandra for some reason. Okay? And Ransom asks him, page 27, are you happy? Are you happy about it? If you mean, does my reason accept the view that he, God, will deliver me safe, the Eldil of Perelandra, Malacandra, will deliver me safe on the surface of Perelandra, the answer is yes. Yes, I believe he's going to get me there safe. It's not what he asked, though, is it? Are you happy about it? He says, I think I feel as a man who believes in the future life, that is life after death, feels when he is taken out to face a firing party, a firing squad. It's like, I believe, Lord, help my unbelief, kind of. Perhaps it's good practice. What does that mean? Perhaps it's good practice. One of the talks I did here, and it never occurred to me until just now, was on Flannery O'Connor's A Good Man is Hard to Find. The conclusion of that short story ends with the misfit shooting the grandmother. He puts a bunch of bullets in her. Why? Because she reaches out and physically, literally touches him and says, "Why, you're one of my babies. You're one of my own." And she breaks down the walls that O'Connor is trying to suggest that separate us. Existentialism, nihilism essentially say we all live in a box and nothing penetrates that box. Nothing can break us out of that box. And she does. And he shoots her and then says, anybody remember? She'd have been a good woman if there had been somebody there to kill her every day. It's this notion of Christian existentialism. This moment by moment. What? Dying. Okay? So he's saying, happy? Maybe not quite the right word. So he gets sent off to Perelandra. We're going to skip a bunch. Ransom lands. He's in water. He sees these weird things on the water, the floating islands. He gets on one of the floating islands, and he kind of wanders around. He gets his sea legs, so to speak, where he can walk on the floating island and such. He has wonderful experiences. He finds food to eat. He finds these gourds that he eats, and he immediately wants to eat another one. But something stops him. And he says it'd be like listening to the same symphony over again. He keeps having these, he comes across this fruit and thinks, if I could take this back to Earth, I could market this. Men would kill for this. And he comes to the same conclusion. I shouldn't have another one. He goes walking through a forest, and there's these shining, like clear globes hanging from trees. And they're shimmering. And he walks up close to one, and he just watches it shimmer, and then it bursts. And we get this description. Where is it? I can't find it.
49.
Is it?
Page 49, Dr. Sherman.
Yeah. He gives us this description of the experience. It's a lot harder to turn pages with one hand. 48. Yeah, that's not the one I'm thinking of. Where the globe bursts over him, and suddenly he looks around him, and the colors are richer. It's like his eyes are opened for the first time. I did have it right. Yeah, right there. 47 in mine. Such was the refreshment that he seemed to himself to have been till now. So he's been on Perelandra a day or so. Till now, but half awake. When he opened his eyes, which had closed involuntarily at the shock of moisture, all the colors about him seemed richer, and the dimness of that world seemed clarified. A re-enchantment fell upon him. What's he mean by re-enchantment? Here's where I'm going to make my first outside Lewis reference. Jim mentioned in the introduction the myth lore in Tolkien. The Inklings, when they would, get together at our people talking about the Eagle and Child, Bird and Baby, when they would get there at the Bird and Baby or the King's Arms or in Lewis's rooms to drink and smoke and read each other's work, they critiqued each other's work. I am convinced that when Lewis is writing this, thinking about this, he probably, take that back, not probably, he might have before him also, or he has in his mind at least, because he had an amazing memory, Tolkien's essay on fairy stories, which I've talked about here before. One of the things that Tolkien says in his essay on fairy stories, that fairy stories provide for us, is recovery. Recovery is regaining of a clear view. And then he goes on and says, of seeing as we were meant to see. Well, what happens here? He sees everything new. Now, he's new to the planet. Everything is new. But it's like the scales have fallen, all right? This is all part of this new education center. Is your hand up?
No.
Oh, okay. If you got a question, stop me and I'll. And he goes on and says, this itch to have things, this is the bottom of 48, this itch to have things over again, as if life were a film that could be unrolled twice or even made to work backwards. Was it possibly the root of all evil? Well, what does Paul tell us is the root of all evil? Radix malorum est cupiditas. The root of all evil is greed, the love of money. Ransom. Was it possibly the root of all evil? Well, no, of course, the love of money was called that. But money itself, perhaps one valued it chiefly as a defense against chance. A security for being able to have things over again. A means of arresting the unrolling of the film. Now, something I had highlighted in the first two chapters was Lewis telling us in his thoughts about Ransom's being kidnapped and taken to Malacandra. The unfortunate accident. Okay. Those two terms, unfortunate accident, don't mean the same thing. What does unfortunate mean? Got to go back to the original form of the root word, fortune. A Roman goddess who has her control, her power, where? Here, on earth. That's why we talk about someone has bad fortune. It means fortune is frowning upon you. Fortune is no longer smiling at you. Good fortune is when fortune is blessing you. Okay? Fortune and fate are different things. Fate's totally outside of our planetary existence, so to speak. Okay? So an unfortunate accident. What's an accident? An unplanned meeting. Literally, contact meeting. Okay? Was it unfortunate? Chance. Was it chance that he's talking about here? What does he say again? It chiefly was a defense against chance. What's chance? It's the same thing. It's something what we don't control. This is why I mentioned Boethius earlier. Those of you who have read Boethius, he's starting. He started actually in the first chapter, bringing up the Boethian ideals, or ideas, okay? He keeps going on. I'm going to skip a little bit more. After he walks through the bubble tree and thinks again about doing it again, on page 50, we're told, he was once more forbidden by the same inner advisor, which had already spoken to him twice since he came to Perelandra. What's that inner advisor? Conscience? Is it something else? God? Is conscience God, you know? So, money, in fact, would provide the means of saying encore in a voice that could not be disobeyed. In other words, if you had that, and it were, laid down in front of you, Lewis is suggesting, Ransom is thinking, it'd be impossible to be disobeyed. Okay? And then he sees someone. He sees someone on the back of a fish. He's not seen another human form at all. He's seen animals, he's seen birds, he's seen dragons, And he sees this human form, and it dips away because the islands float on the waves. And suddenly he's filled with loneliness. Notice he doesn't know what loneliness is until he's aware he's alone. He's not aware he's alone, seemingly. Just throw that out, let it hang there. Seemingly, he's not aware he's alone until he sees someone and that presence disappears. That presence becomes absence. Okay? So, he tries to find this other person, and eventually does. And he meets her, suddenly realizes it's a woman, green, totally naked like he is, beautiful. Finally is able to get over to where she is on the floating island she is on. And the description we have, beginning of chapter 5 of this. At the end of the first long paragraph of that chapter, we're told, and there walking before him, as if on the other side of a brook, was the lady herself. We're told the distance between their two islands, a couple sentences above, is about 5 feet. Walking with her head a little bowed, her hands occupied in plaiting together some blue flowers. Lewis stole this image. This image comes from a medieval poem called The Pearl. And in this poem called The Pearl, it's about a man whose daughter dies. Her name is Pearl. And he has a dream. It's a dream vision poem. And the dream is, he's on one side, there's a creek or river, and she's on the other side. And it's her consolation to him, telling him what he needs to do, essentially, to make it to the other side. The river is, symbolic of death. Okay? Well, when she realized he was there and saw him, she burst into laughter. Why? Is it ever specifically stated? It's not, other than the name she gives to him. She calls him piebald. What's it mean? Varied. His coloring is varied. Why? He floated, transported there, in essentially an ice coffin. And when he went through heaven with the sun shining on him, the side that was exposed to the sun gets tanned. The other side, he's British, pale. Really pale, okay? And she sees him and bursts into laughter. She thinks he was, and he was kind of, annoyed by that. And she tells him, her first words, I was young yesterday. She began. So the sentence begins, I was young yesterday. She began. She doesn't continue until the next paragraph. The narrator interrupts the narrative to tell us about Ransom, not about her. She says, I was young yesterday when I laughed at you. Now I know that the people in your world do not like to be laughed at. How much younger was she? Notice she's using the same language that he is. They're both speaking what's called Old Solar. But she's not using the same language he is. He doesn't understand I was young yesterday in terms of what that means. So he says, you say you were young? Yes. You're not young today too? What does he take young to mean? Age. What does she mean? Experience, wisdom, understanding, awareness. She appeared to be thinking, I see it now. Notice just the beauty of the language, that verb see. It has so many meanings. I see it now. It is very strange to say one is young at the moment one is speaking. But tomorrow I shall be older. Literally, obviously, yes. And then I shall say, I was young today. You are quite right. This is great wisdom. How much older will she be? She's using young and older in what sense? That we don't, usually. We use it solely in the sense of time. She uses it to mean something going on up here. Knowledge gained, wisdom gained, experience gained. Ransom, what do you mean? Okay. Why was Ransom? Back to the first two chapters. Ransom tells Lewis that Weston and Devine made a big mistake when they kidnapped him. Anybody remember what that mistake was? They brought a philologist, a person who studies languages and can pick up languages, and his model was J.R.R. Tolkien, who spoke 14 languages. Okay? Who could pick up languages, like at the drop of a hat. And so he picks up the universal language, so to speak. And so now he's here able to speak to her. But he doesn't know what she means. She says, this looking backward and forward, this is going to be one of the issues involved in her temptation. This looking backward and forward along the line and seeing how a day has one appearance as it comes to you, another when you are in it, and a third when it has gone past, like the waves. We could literally stop right here and spend a couple hours just on that passage. What is she talking about? And this is the Boethian element in a nutshell. How is she describing this looking forward and backward along the line? And seeing how a day looks one way as it's coming to you, one way as you're in it, and one way as it is behind you. How do we experience, what's the word I'm not saying?
The eternal now?
Close. That's,
Timeline.
yeah, there you go. Timeline. We experience time, what? Linearly. All of us, all our lives. The older we get, what happens to that linear understanding of time? It begins to be not just one-dimensional. It becomes, at the very least, two-dimensional. Because as you farther and farther along you go, what? And you look back, what do you start to see about earlier events in your life? Or maybe I'm the only one that does, but I don't think so.
Start to see the cause of it.
You start to see James Burke, TV series, BBC, back in the 70s or early 80s. It's on PBS. Anybody remember what it's called? Connections. It's fantastic. He would pick out these seemingly random things, and he would show how discovering longitude led to, I'm pulling this off the top of my head, this isn't one of the little ones, the invention of the computer chip. All these seemingly totally unrelated things are actually all related. In other words, one way to think of that idea of time, think of our lives as like, this shirt. All of our lives are the threads in this shirt. We experience them how? Just, plodding along. Sometime another thread gets in your way and you move over it or under it, And yet, from that point of on that line, how do we see everything else? They're all just as flat as we are. So what do you need to do in order to kind of understand it? You got to rise above. You got to get into that third dimension to look down. What is she telling us about herself? How does she experience time? That way. She doesn't experience time the way Ransom does. Okay? This is, your mind should be just wanting to explode at this point. She is telling him her awareness, her understanding, her perception of everything is in one sense beyond his understanding. Okay? Ransom says, but you are very little older than yesterday. He's still not getting it. She says, how do you know that? What's he taking older to be? Linear time. So many hours have passed since yesterday. He says, a night is not a very long time. And she goes, okay, I see now. Why does she keep doing that? It's like she pauses. Software gets updated. Why do I say software gets updated? Who updates the software? The developer, right? Who's updating her software? Malildil. How? She's in direct contact, direct experience. When I was preparing what was supposed to be the entire Space Trilogy, talk about hubris, last year, it was Lent. And then part of my Lenten reading, I was reading two things. One of them was a quick read, the other one not. St. Silouan's Art of Prayer, wasn't a saint then, not St. Silouan, Theophan the Recluse, Art of Prayer. And the other one, Brother Lawrence, Franciscan priest, monk, 16th century, French, The Practice of the Presence of God, which I'd first read when I was like 15, 16, something like that. And really interestingly, so you've got this Franciscan and this Orthodox monk, and they're saying the exact same thing. They're just using different terminology. Okay? What are they both talking about? Brother Lawrence says, and this is largely the Practice of the Presence of God, is a series of letters to a nun, if I remember right, about learning to live, literally, moment by moment, in the presence of God. Taking everything as being what? God ordained. God happened. God, everything. Well, if I remember correctly, she's going through a lot of issues. One of them being illness. Kind of hard to accept that, illness from God. And then Saint Theophan essentially does the same thing. In fact, I've got a long quote somewhere in this series, in those pages, from St. Silouan, where he talks about what that means. So she thinks and says, I see it now. You think times have lengths. And there we are. Time is a line. A night is always a night, whatever you do in it. As from this tree to that is always so many paces, whether you take them quickly or slowly. Suppose that's true in a way, but the waves do not always come at equal distances. And again, remember, this is a water world. There is a fixed land, but most of the world is entirely covered with water. So where you live, sleep, etc., it changes all the time. She goes on, I see that you come from a wise world. ... If this is wise. I have never done it before. What's the it? Hyphen. Stepping out of life into the alongside and looking at oneself living as if one were not alive. This is central. What she just said, that idea, is central to the temptation that she's going to be put under in a few pages. So, notice what Lewis is doing. He's having the protagonist give or prepare the ground for the temptation. Totally unwittingly. Totally unknowingly. Okay? They keep talking. So, stepping out and looking alongside. Like seeing oneself going through time. And Ransom asked her, what do you know about other worlds? And she tells him. He's like, how do you know that? You can't see other worlds. Her world is covered by cloud. And she says, Maladil's putting it into my mind. Let me talk about your upgrade. And we're told on page 61, up till now her face had been grave, serious, solemn. At this point, she clapped her hands, and a smile such as Ransom had never seen changed her. One does not see that smile here, except in children, but there is nothing of the child about it there. What's that smile? What do children have? This is going back to Tolkien's fairy story essay. What do children have that, generally speaking, I take that back, that I don't. I won't cast any aspersions on the rest of you. A sense of wonder. They can look at the most mundane thing and just be full of awe. Okay? Oh, I see. I am older now. Like, literally older than she was 10 seconds ago. Your world has no roof. You look right out into the high place and see, it's the first time it's used, the great dance with your own eyes. What's the great dance she's talking about there? The movement of, not literally, we don't get to see the movement of the spheres, movement of the heavens. And we'll use Ransom's terminology rather than just, stars in space. Okay? They keep talking. Ransom's like, stop. I'm bewildered. She says, what is bewildering? She mentions the other planet that Ransom has been to, Malacandra. Maladil is telling me, she answered, and suddenly the landscape had become different, though with a difference none of the senses would identify. So if the landscape had become different, but none of the senses could identify the difference, then how does the landscape become different? It's not being perceived by what? One of the five senses. It's being perceived different. How? Another sense? The nous? The heart? Is he finally seeing the way she sees? We're told. The light was dim, the air gentle, and all Ransom's body was bathed in bliss. but the garden world where he stood seemed to be packed quite full, and as if an unendurable pressure had been laid upon his shoulders, his legs failed him, and he half sank, half fell into a sitting position. Why half sank, half fell? Why does he fall into a sitting position? What did she just say? The beginning of that paragraph. She doesn't say, Maladil told me. Maladil, present, is telling me. Maladil is where? There. Boom. And Ransom goes down. Very similar scene in Lewis's final novel, Till We Have Faces. Beautiful scene where the character doesn't see what the character is meant to see until she falls on her knees. And then she sees this wonderful castle that's always been there, but you have to be humble to see it. So, she says, it all comes into my mind now. While she's there talking to him, what? Her experience is being enlarged. What comes from experience? What does experience build in people? One of the things, at least, hopefully, if you learn from experience, wisdom. But in our world, what often must happen for wisdom to be gained? You got to learn from what? Meaning, mistakes, hard knocks. You got to learn from those bad choices. Okay? She doesn't. What's the difference? Pre-fall, post-fall.
Death.
Knowledge of good and evil. William Blake, 19th century poet that Lewis wrote a little bit about sometimes, did 2 series of books that he illustrated and everything because he was a master illustrator himself. One was called Songs of Innocence, and the other one was called Songs of Experience. Look online and read Blake's little poem, The Lamb. It's just this little poem about a lamb, and it's very sing-songy. Little lamb, dost thou know who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Blah, blah, blah. Okay? And the other one, read The Tiger. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the something of the night, etc. Yeah.
Did the one who make the lamb make you?
Make thee. Okay? What's Blake doing there? Blake is talking about 2 similar things, but one is in the collection Songs of Innocence, and the other one is in the collection Songs of Experience. Okay? And the implication is, what must occur in the experience? Because Blake thought this. Blake thought, essentially you had to experience evil. You had to experience badness in order to kind of gain that wisdom. All right? So, they go on. Ransom's still wrestling. She's miles ahead of him, and he's trying to catch up. In fact, he says, the narrator says, she says, it all comes into my mind now. I see the big furry creatures, the white giants, what is it you called them? Sorns, the blue rivers. Oh, what a strong pleasure it would be to see them with my outward eyes. She sees them with her inward eyes, okay? And then she goes on and says, it is only in the ancient worlds they linger yet. That is, on Malacandra. These creatures that are there, they linger. What is it? Linger means what? You're not long for this world. Okay? Ransom. Why? You know that better than I do. And we're getting to one of the main points. He's like, he's drawing blanks. What are you talking about? I mean that in your world, Malodil first took himself this form, the form of your race and mine. And she goes on and teaches him from that point on, from the point of the incarnation forward, all new species will be like this. All new, to use the language from Malacandra, all new now rational beings will be human. Why? Because God became man. That's it. She, in fact, even later, I think it was on maybe on that same page, she says, the corner was turned there. Before then, all different kinds of creatures. Okay? So, they keep talking. They decide at some point, I don't remember exactly where, that they're going to go to the fixed land. She tells him about, she's making the animals, the beasts older every day. And the implication is, at some point, the unspeaking beasts will become speaking beasts. Okay? They serve to do her pleasure, to her and the king's pleasure, etc. And Ransom asks, at some point, batteries? Sure. Is this one on? No? It is on? Ransom asked to speak to... It's not on. Batteries on. Channel 2? I have no idea.
Hello, check one. Can you hear it?
Turn up the volume.
And inside here? Okay. I think it's okay.
Ransom asks, I'm going to toast in here. Ransom asks to meet the king or to meet her mother. And she says, I am the mother. And that's when Ransom finally understands where he is and kind of what's afoot. No sound?
Hello?
Yep, there we go. Take that one. Can you hear me now in the back? Okay. Yeah, inside. So, she says, I am the mother, etc. They start to talk about the king. They start to talk about Earth, Earth's mother, Earth's father. She says, greet your mother when you see her. Kind of hard to do that. He has to explain death. She says, maybe that's what you've been sent here to teach me. He's like, not really. And he explains, bottom of 67. You don't understand. It is not like that. It is horrible. Talking about death. It has a foul smell. Malodil himself wept when he saw it. And he said, you can never understand. In our world, not all events are pleasing or welcome. There may be such a thing that you would cut off both your arms and your legs to prevent it happening, and yet it happens with us. Okay? How can one wish any of those waves not to reach us, which Malodil is rolling towards us? What does she mean by waves? She means literal waves, for one thing, because of the nature of the planet she's on. What else? Life events. Unfortunate accidents. illness, all those kinds of things. Okay? Against his better judgment, Ransom found himself goaded into argument. Really? Is she goading him? Is she? Come on, take the. He says, but even you, when you first saw me, you were expecting and hoping to meet the king. You were disappointed. And she says, oh, you make me grow older more quickly than I can bear. It was suddenly borne in upon him that her purity and peace were not as they had seemed, things settled and inevitable like the purity and peace of an animal, that they were alive and therefore breakable. A balance maintained by a mind and therefore, at least in theory, able to be lost. Ransom for the first time realizes what? He has to be careful with what he says. Right? So he's already been saying a bunch of things.
Sorry.
It's okay.
We're going to get this to work.
Got it. He's already said a bunch of things that has moved her along. But notice at no point has, in the conversation, has Maladil suddenly become silent. He speaks, Maladil puts things in her head. He speaks, Maladil tells her more. I don't mean through Ransom, I mean directly into her news, her heart. Okay? There was... My eyes are bad. There was no reason why she should step out of her happiness into the psychology of our race, but neither was there any wall between to prevent her doing so. The sense of precariousness terrified him, but when she looked at him again, he changed that word to adventure. He changed the word from precariousness, which means what? You could fall. Danger. To adventure, like challenge. And then all word... Sorry. And then all words... I do it with magnetic stripes on credit cards too. I go through them like once a year. Try this again. Lost my place. And then all words died out of his mind. Once more, he could not look steadily at her. He knew now what the old painters were trying to represent when they invented the halo. Gaiety and gravity together. A splendor as of martyrdom. I'm assuming this is not working now.
I don't know, doctor.
I'm afraid to say anything. Yeah. Yes, the bent one is at work. Yet with no pain in it all seemed to pour from her countenance. I have been so young till this moment. Can they hear me inside? Nope.
No. No, it's not live.
No, but she can read your lips, obviously.
Well, my wife will warn you, but I can probably make it so they can hear me in there. 'Cause I've literally had people on the other side of Peck Hall, you know what this is like, tell me to be a little quieter.
You guys want another joke while we wait?
Yes, Tim.
This topic, what do you call a black man on the moon? An astronaut, you racist.
See how long it lasts.
Are we live?
Yeah.
Can they hear me? Okay. She says, I've been so young till this moment that all my life now seems to have been a kind of sleep. I have thought that I was being carried, and behold, I was walking. She thought she merely floated on the waves of Maladil's pleasure. And now she realizes she wasn't. She was walking, meaning what? walking, on her own. So she goes on and says, what you've made me see is as plain as the sky, but I never saw it before. One finds a different fruit. She says it's like one finds a different fruit and not the fruit one thought of. One joy is expected and another is given. But this I had never noticed before, that the very moment of the finding there is in the mind a kind of thrusting back or setting aside. The picture of the fruit you have not found is still for a moment before you. That is, the good you wanted is not the good you received. But the moment you received the good you received, she's saying, she felt for a moment, there's still the thing that I wanted, but then it's gone. That's not my experience. My experience is, I wanted the thing I wanted, and try to hold on to the thing I wanted that I didn't get, which means I'm trying to hold on to something I don't have. Right? This is important again. All of this is going to come up in the temptation. She goes on. The picture of the fruit you have not found is still for a moment before you. You could send your soul after the good you had expected, instead of turning it to the good you had got. You could refuse the real good. You could make the real fruit taste insipid by thinking of the other. Okay? Ransom. It's really not the same as finding a stranger when you were looking for, your husband. She says, but it's how I came to understand the whole thing. And this, O piebald, is the glory and wonder you have made me see, that it is I myself, who turn from the good expected to the given good. That is, Malodil isn't making. Is this off again?
I don't know. Maybe my issue is that it just has to be closer. Let me just see what if this test. No, this is turning off on you too.
Somebody doesn't want you talking.
Try that.
More than
again.
one. I was going to say, I'll hold them both. Where was I? She said, this is the glory and wonder you have made me see. It is I myself, who turn from the good expected to the given good. Out of my own heart I do it. One can conceive a heart which did not. Okay? Which thing which clung to the good it had first thought of, and turned the good which was given it into no good. Okay? Ransom. I don't see the wonder and glory of it. Why? She thinks her perception now, it fills her with wonder. It is a glorious thing to behold. Ransom doesn't. Why? She hasn't taken that step that breaks the law, that goes beyond the boundary. Ransom is born into that state, into that condition. Okay? She says, I thought that I was carried in the will of him I love, but now I see that I walk with it. I thought that the good things he sent me drew me into them, as the waves lift the islands. But now I see that it is I who plunge into them with my own legs and arms, as when we go swimming. Notice, I plunge. She doesn't jump in feet first. She dives in head first. One's own self, to be walking from one good to another, walking beside him as himself may walk, not even holding hands. How has he made me so separate from himself? Up until this point, what did she think? She was connected. Now she's coming to this realization she's not connected. There is a separation. Sounds like aliens. I'm sitting here and, how did it enter his mind to conceive such a thing? The world is so much larger than I thought. I thought we were along paths, but it seems there are no paths. The going itself is the path. Tolkien reference. In The Lord of the Rings, there's a scene in which one? Two Towers. Scene in Two Towers, where Frodo and Sam and Gollum are making the way across what are called the Dead Marshes. Paths, not the Paths of the Dead, the Gladden Fields. And Frodo asks Gollum, how are we to make our path? And they talk back and forth. Gollum doesn't answer. They talk back and forth. And Frodo makes the statement to Sam that it seems that this is the way our path has been laid. Okay? Later on, in the chapter The Stairs of Cirith Ungol, they're making their way up this, up this hidden stairwell. And Frodo makes the comment, Sam makes the comment that it's like they don't have a path. The path is made as they move. Another reference, Old Testament. What does God tell Abraham before he changes his name to Abram? Back there in Ur, before he leaves to go to Canaan, the land that he will give him.
I will be your shield and your very great reward.
What else? He says to do something. Do something before me, God says. Walk before me. Walk in my ways, and he'll do what? He'll bless him, etc. He doesn't say, follow me. Walk before me. In other words, God is implying, I think if you take Tolkien and Lewis as the expositors, I'll make sure you don't get lost. But you've got to go. Yeah, exactly. Okay? So, it seems there are no paths, she says. Ransom, have you no fear? That it will ever be hard to turn your heart from the thing you wanted to the thing Maladil sends? And she says, again, I see. The wave you plunge into may be very swift and great. You may need all your force to swim into it. You mean he might send me a good like that. Okay? Just let that sit there for a minute. Ransom. Yes. Or, like a wave so swift and great that all your force was too little. What does Ransom introduce into the conversation? God may demand more than you are capable of. Biblical, non-biblical. Yeah. Non-biblical. Okay? She doesn't think so. She says, it often happens that way in swimming. Is not that part of the delight? Why? What does Ransom really mean when he says, a wave so swift and great that all your force was too little? What does the all your force mean? When she says, you may need all your force to swim into it. Ransom takes that to mean to be able to do what with your body in connection with the wave? Have control. to be able to determine the outcome. She's saying just the opposite. Those are the best waves there are. The waves that require you to do what? Just jump.
Walk by faith.
Or swim by faith, yeah. Exactly. That's exactly what she's getting at. Is that not part of the delight? And then he says, but you're happy without not being with the king? Do you not want him? She says, how could there be anything I don't want? Why does he bring up the king? It's a plot device, I think. Because Ransom is introducing another idea that the tempter will use. Okay? So, when Ransom says, yes, or like a wave so swift and great that all your force was too little, I drew a line over to the blank page next to it. What is CSL getting at? Does God ever send waves too strong for us? This scene shows Ransom's lack of faith, and it leads to a lie, then a clarification. What's the lie? Ransom says, she asked Ransom, because he's listening to her, and he's developing a frown. His brow is furrowed. And she says, why, O piebald, are you making little hills and valleys in your forehead? And why do you give a little lift of your shoulders? Are these the signs of something in your world? They mean nothing. This is the first lie in Perelandra. It was a small lie, but there it would not do. It tore him as he uttered it, like a vomit. It became of infinite importance. The silver meadow and the golden sky seemed to fling it back at him. As if stunned by some measureless anger, in the very air he stammered an emendation. They mean nothing I could explain to you. But yeah, it's probably safe. How do you explain, what a furrowed brow really means to someone who has never experienced it? Okay? Notice what he's had to do. It's not an apology. It's not asking forgiveness, but it's a clarification. He realizes he's done/said something wrong, and he has to do what? He has to fix it. Okay? He's still, part of my note, still being purified in spirit. And, more importantly, in reason. Okay? So, chapter 6. This is the last of the intro section. Okay? It's Ransom still with the Green Lady. And it begins with a long paragraph. Really long paragraph. Good grief. About a third of the way down, she goes off. She essentially says, you may leave me now. And he's aware he's in the presence of a queen. The sense of being in someone's presence, now it's somebody else's presence. The someone is capitalized and presence is capitalized. The sense of being in someone's presence, which had descended on him with such unbearable pressure during the very first moments of his conversation with the lady, did not disappear when he had left her. It was, if anything, increased. Her society had been in some degree a protection against it. Her absence left him not to solitude, but to a more formidable kind of privacy. At first it was almost intolerable. There seemed no room. The space is packed. God is everywhere present, kind of a. Later on, he discovered it was intolerable only at certain moments. At just those moments, in fact, symbolized by the impulse to smoke and to put his hands in his pockets. Beautiful, beautiful image. When a man asserts his independence and feels that now at last he's on his own. When you felt like that, then the very air seemed too crowded to breathe. He's like, a complete fullness seemed to be excluding you from a place which, nevertheless, you were unable to leave. But when you gave in to the thing, gave yourself up to it, there was no burden to be borne. It became not a load, but a medium, a sort of splendor, as of eatable, drinkable, breathable gold, which fed and carried you and not only poured into you, but out from you as well. Taken the wrong way, it suffocated. Taken the right way, it made terrestrial life seem, by comparison, a vacuum. What is it? That's the presence of God. To those who don't like the presence of God, it is what? Hell. To those who do, it's paradise. Notice, it's a perspective. It's a perception. It's all in here. If you love God, that presence is blessedness itself. If you hate God, it's the all-consuming fire of God's presence. So, we had several pages where they think and talk, etc., and they decide to go visit the fixed land. Okay? Fixed land is exactly what it sounds like. We would call it like a continent, you know. But oddly, in Perelandra, there is a prohibition. The prohibition is you can visit the fixed land, but you may not sleep on it. That's it. You can visit it as often as you want, but you may not sleep on the fixed land. And for Ransom, when he comes to realize that, he's like, well, you know, it kind of makes sense. I mean, in one sense. Not really, but okay, I'll go with it. And they talk about that prohibition. And the Green Lady says, page 75, about a third of the way, quarter of the way down, end of a long paragraph. Now it seems that good is not the same in all worlds, that Maladil has forbidden in one what he allows in another. And Ransom's kind of like, well, you know, you can't take my world as the guiding star because all our lands are fixed, right? If we weren't allowed to sleep on them, where would we sleep? Underwater, yeah. She says, no, that's not it. Maladil himself has told me now, right in the middle of the page. And it could not be so if your world has no floating lands. But he is not telling me why he has forbidden it to us. Probably some good reason, Ransom blurts out. And the C.S. Lewis in The Green Lady, this is my terminology, calls him out on it. What do I mean by that? Oh, piebald, how often the people of your race speak. Ransom, I'm sorry. What are you sorry for? I'm sorry if you think I talk too much. Too much? How can I tell what would be too much for you to talk? In our world, when they say a man talks too much, they mean they wish him to be silent. If that is what they mean, then why do they not say it? What made you laugh? Why did I say that C.S. Lewis in her? Anybody know? He had a reputation that anyone who would say something flippantly, just to kind of like make small talk, he would eviscerate. And that's because of his training. When he was tutored by a guy he nicknamed the Old Knock, okay, that man taught him never take anything someone says essentially on face value without challenging it. Okay? It's why people did not like doing debates with him. I mean, he did debates. The one major debate he did with a Catholic theologian, philosopher, Elizabeth Anscombe, Lewis thought he lost. She thought she lost. Who knows? It's about an ontological proof of God, by the way. So she says he's not telling me why he has forbidden it. Ransom, there's probably some good reason. He just throws that out there. Why? To seemingly keep the conversation going. Does he have some good reason? Meaning Maladil? Given within the course of the novel? What is it? Because I don't want you to. That's it. It's a command. Follow the command. There is no other good reason. It is what? A simple test. Okay? But this idea of sleeping on the fixed land is going to be the hook that Weston, the unman, uses to try to enact the temptation. So,
Is that why Maladil did not
yep.
show that to her then when he was saying all these other things?
Repeat the question.
Question was, is that why Maladil doesn't speak to her when they're talking about the prohibition, the rule? I mean, she's not getting anything from Maladil saying, oh, it's okay, here's why I don't want you to sleep. He's silent. 3-year-old, Yeah, that's exactly why. Okay? And there are going to be times we're going to see very soon, because I'm going to move along real quick now. There are going to be times during the temptation, Maladil will be totally silent. Why? Well, you can't have a temptation if God's sitting there speaking in your ear telling you X, Y, and Z. It's not fair, so to speak. Okay? So, while they're on the fixed land, they see something, page 76, fall out of the sky and land in the ocean. And Jove, Ransom says, page 76, by Jove, what was that? Kind of interesting, by Jove. I mean, it's an English colloquialism, but it's also, by God, what is that? God allowed that. Okay? So, he starts thinking, what is that? They see it again. It's around. It's a sphere. He knows that shape. He's seen it before, not just because it's a sphere, but he traveled in something like that once before. And he kind of starts to try to warn her. I'm trying to see where to pick this up. Page 81. They see it open up, and something comes out, and we hear Ransom's thoughts, bottom of page 81, about Weston, and we get a brief synopsis of Weston's ideology again. Or, let me rephrase that. We get a brief synopsis of what was Weston's ideology. At least at the end of Malacandra, of Out of the Silent Planet. Okay? And that ideology at that point was, we got to keep humanity from dying out. So we need to colonize space. We need to colonize the planets. Keep humanity going. Doesn't matter what form or shape it takes, as long as it's somehow human consciousness. Okay? Top of page, 82, Ransom's, talking or thinking about Weston, for galaxy after galaxy can be forced to sustain everywhere and forever the sort of life which is contained in the loins of our own species, a dream begotten by the hatred of death upon the fear of true immortality, fondled in secret by thousands of ignorant men and hundreds who are not ignorant. I love that passage. One of the things Lewis said in a letter that prompted his writing the novels, not only The Wager with Tolkien, but he had an undergraduate student who was a real big proponent of science fiction and really liked the idea of spreading humanity from Earth to Mars and the other planets and then, interstellar travel and all that kind of stuff. And Lewis thought, it's not really all that great, because he was familiar with some of those scientists. Some of them actually were teachers at universities where he was, things like that. And he saw the danger in it, okay? You see this, the ideology there in shows like For All Mankind, The Expanse, Musk wanting to go to Mars, etc. So Ransom, thinking of Weston, thinking of what happened at the end of Out of the Silent Planet, Ransom asks, where are the Eldilla? Why haven't I seen any Eldilla on Perelandra? And she's like, oh, they're here. They're just, they're not around. She says, he shows me all the natures of these blessed creatures. This is the bottom of 82. But there is no obeying them now. Just mind-blowing here. There is no obeying them now, not in this world. That is all the old order piebald, the far side of the wave that has rolled past us and will not come again. That very ancient world to which you journeyed was put under the Eldilla. In your own world, also they ruled once, but not since our beloved became a man. In your world they linger still, but in our world, which is the first of worlds to wake after the great change, when God became man, they have no power. There is nothing now between us and him. What is the role of an angel? Its name tells us, Angelus. It's a messenger. You don't need a messenger when you're speaking to the CEO. I mean, when the communication is direct. They have grown less and we have increased. And now Malado puts it into my mind that this is their glory and their joy. They received us things of the low worlds who breed and breathe, as weak and small beasts whom their lightest touch could destroy. And their glory was to cherish us, this is the part that's mind-blowing, to cherish us and make us older till we were older than they, till they could fall at our feet. Know you not that you shall judge angels? It is a joy we shall not have. However, I teach the beasts they will never be better than I. What is she saying? We will become, are really now, better than the Eldilla. But it is a joy beyond all, not that it is better joy than ours. Every joy is beyond all others. Okay, back up. Not that it is a joy, a better joy than ours. Every joy is beyond all others. This one little statement ties in to the last two chapters. The whole idea of the great dance. The fruit we are eating is always the best fruit of all. Because when is it happening? It's the eternal now. Okay? Ransom. There have been Eldils who did not think it a joy. She knows that. Because she knows about the Eldils on our planet. Okay? How? You spoke yesterday, lady, of clinging to the old good. Yes, for a few heartbeats. There was an Elder who clung longer, who has been clinging since before the worlds were made. But the old good would cease to be a good at all if he did that. Yes, it has ceased, and still he clings. She stared at him. He interrupts her. She's about to speak. There is no time to explain. There he goes again. Thinking of time how? Linearly. Why? Because he's seen that sphere pop open. He's seen the airboat come out and Weston make his way towards the fixed land. He wants to prepare her. Okay? Bottom of 83. Ransom saw the small black object, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, what could he, Ransom, possibly do without support from the Eldilla? He's thinking. He's been thinking. Ever since he saw Weston, ever since he saw the spaceship arrive. I've got backup. Like he did on Malacandra. He felt a sense of injustice. What was the good of sending him, a mere scholar, to cope with a situation of this sort? Any ordinary pugilist, or better still, any man who could make good use of a Tommy gun, would have been more to the purpose. It's interesting that he says that, because when he says that, or when he thinks that, what is his mind telling us? What does he know will have to happen? That's got to be eliminated. It will not be what? Let's have a debate. Okay? I have a note written up above, which I can't really read. Has Maladil sent Ransom too strong a wave? Too big a task? Is he going to dive into this wave? Is this going to be an adventure or something else? Ransom says, I need to meet him. It is not your world, Piebald. In other words, take a seat. I'm the queen. I will meet him. Okay? Chapter 7, beginning of the second part, the temptation part. Okay? And what is Ransom immediately struck by? You turn that page, you read the first paragraph, and it's like he's oblivious to what's going on, and he suddenly realizes Weston is speaking Old Solar. He's a physicist, he's not a linguist. And he's speaking fluent Old Solar. And what does Ransom immediately think? My one ace, my one tool, my one gift, stolen. He felt that he was now in the presence of the incalculable. So what does it mean for something to be incalculable?
Infinite.
Too large.
Can't be known, too large. What else does it mean? More
Infinite.
down to earth. Uncontrollable.
An academic uses his mind to control the situation. This is beyond those gifts.
What is one of the lessons Ransom is learning? This is why I think the book is much more about Ransom than it is about Perelandra. He's not in control. And that's a good thing. He must learn to do what? To cede that control. To cede that desire for control. To live in the presence of God. Not to say, I hate this phrase, God's got it. Don't worry about it. Everything's in control. Yeah, on one superficial sense, yes, that is true. But that is a very superficial way of looking at it. So, the lady goes away. Ransom is left to talk to Weston. Weston thinks Ransom's seducing her. Because when Weston first came up, Ransom was trying to block her from going towards Weston, and he runs up and puts his arms around her. They're both naked. Weston's wearing, his pith helmet and gonna march through Africa clothes kind of a thing. He doesn't know what Perelandra's like. And Ransom's like, oh, please. So, Weston explains why he's there. Pages 89 and following. And notice one of the things he says. Ransom's going to admit something about Weston in a while. Weston says, the tragedy of my life, bottom of 89, and indeed of the modern intellectual world in general, and he's speaking 100% true here, is the rigid specialization of knowledge entailed by the growing complexity of what is known.
It's described all of academia.
You just, from kindergarten through graduate school, to where a dissertation has got to be so narrowly specialized that there's 10 people in the world who can understand it, if that, and 3 who want to, you know. Talks about the false humanist ideal of knowledge as an end in itself never appealed to me. I always wanted to know in order to achieve utility. In other words, how could I use this knowledge? He's a physicist. Okay? So he goes on, keeps talking about that. But his ideology changed. Why? When he got back from Malacandra, he had a nervous breakdown. Because he met things there that he wasn't expecting to meet. Powers much greater than ours, for one thing. Okay? So he says, almost the middle of page 91, he's now more interested in life, spreading life. Bottom of 90, emergent evolution. Okay? All is one. The stuff of mind, the unconsciously purposive dynamism is present from the very beginning. This idea that everything is moving upwards and coming to some great, but not an apotheosis, not into a godlike being. It's something other than that. So, page 91, about a third of the way down. To spread spirituality, he says, not to spread the human race, is henceforth my mission. Well, what is meant by spirituality? Whatever one damn well pleases. In fact, he's going to very quickly go on and say, you're stuck with your old theological terms and convictions and traditions, your vocabulary. We're speaking the same language, Ransom. We're saying the same things, you're just using different terminology. So he says, 92, when he says, you're familiar, God is a spirit, Ransom. Get hold of that. You're familiar with it. Stick to it. Well, yeah, okay. What then? Why, spirit, mind, freedom, this is page 92, spontaneity, that's what I'm talking about. Spirit, mind, freedom, spontaneity. 2 of these are not like the other 2. What do freedom and spontaneity have to do with spirit and mind? Absolutely nothing. What do freedom and spontaneity imply, suggest?
You can do whatever you want.
Chaos.
Autonomy. No boundaries, no delineations, no demarcations, no definitions. That is the goal towards which the whole cosmic process is moving. Notice, it's not moving towards order, because freedom and spontaneity are the opposite of order. It's not moving towards cosmos. It's moving towards what? Chaos. The very opposite. The final disengagement of that freedom, that spirituality, is the work to which I dedicate my own life and the life of humanity. The goal, Ransom, the goal, think of it. Pure spirit. What does pure spirit mean? None of this stuff. Gnosticism. What's it really mean? Go back to Genesis 1 and undo it. Because what do we see? God created the day, created the night. first day and night, it was good. He created, period. And it was good. What did he create? Something other than spirit. Created order, he created matter. That matter was good. What is Weston saying? Not true. Not matter. Gnosticism is what's good. Okay? Ransom. By the way, this, what you talked about, is there any sense at all that it's personal? The spirit, this God, is it alive? Exactly. That's where none of them understand, says Weston. He says, you're right. I couldn't have believed it myself. Told recently. Not a person, of course. Anthropomorphism is one of the childish diseases of popular religion. But the opposite extreme of excessive abstraction has perhaps in the aggregate proved more disastrous. Call it a force. 40 years before George Lucas. A great inscrutable force pouring up into us from the dark bases of being. What does Weston's ideology never account for? The Christian ideology does. No. Being. Paul Tillich, who I absolutely detested when I was in my teens and 20s, described God as the ground of all being. The only being. Everything else is non-being in a sense. If you're going to use that word being to describe God, you can't use the same word to describe us because we are totally other. We are totally other, totally unlike in terms of beingness, essence, so to speak. So, a force that can choose its instruments. It is only lately, Ransom, that I've learned from actual experience something which you have believed all your life as part of your religion. And here we're told he suddenly subsided again into a whisper. Why? If you're the only two people there, why would you go? You whisper when you don't want others to hear. Guided. A croaking whisper, unlike his usual voice. Chosen, guided. I become conscious I'm a man set apart. And he immediately becomes one of what in the mid-20th century? Any one of the megalomaniacs who were responsible for the deaths of hundreds of millions. Because they all thought the exact same thing. He says, I know that I am the greatest scientist, that I'm the greatest scientist the world has yet produced. I've been made so for a purpose. It is through me that spirit itself is at this moment pushing on its goal. Ransom, look here, old chap, there's spirit and then there's spirit. You want to be careful about. What? What are you talking about? I mean, a thing might be a spirit and not good for you. What is it, 1 John? Test the spirits? What's a good spirit? If it says that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh, you can trust that one. All right? There's nothing specially fine about simply being a spirit. The devil is a spirit. That's interesting you mentioned the devil. He says, God and devil, heaven and hell, they're the same. He says, it is the most interesting thing in popular religion, this tendency to vociferate, to breed pairs of opposites, heaven and hell, God and devil. I need hardly say that, in my view, no real dualism in the universe is admissible. The doublets are really portraits of spirit, of cosmic energy. Self-portraits, indeed, for it is the life force itself. And he goes on and he explains, the devil is the thing that matter, creation, evolution is coming from, and God is what it is moving towards. A lot of pop religion today says the exact same stuff. Your devil and your God are both pictures of the same force. Your heaven is a picture of the perfect spirituality ahead. Your hell is a picture of the urge or nisus which is driving us onto it from behind. Ransom, you're saying the opposite. As far as I can make out, that angels are devils who have risen in the world. Comes to the same thing. They keep talking. Bottom of that page, 94. You didn't notice, he says, Weston, I picked up a language. Guidance, you know. Guidance. Croaked Weston. Now listen to this description. He was squatting at the roots of his tree, with his knees drawn up, and his face, now the color of putty, wore a fixed and even slightly twisted grin. Guidance, guidance, things coming into my head. I'm being prepared all the time, being made a fit receptacle for it. Okay? That image of sitting on his haunches, knees up in front of him, next to a tree, comes from Milton's Paradise Lost. It's Satan watching Adam and Eve have sex. He's a peeping Tom. He's reduced to an image of a toad, the greatest of the angelic beings, reduced to the image of a toad. Okay? So, he goes on and says, you know, the thing we're reaching toward is called God. The thing we're reaching away from is the devil. And he finally makes the all-important passage or comments. Page 96. Insofar as I am the conductor of the central forward pressure of the universe, I am it. Okay? I am the central forward pressure of the universe. The thing spurring on evolution. Do you see, you timid, scruple-mongering fool? I am the universe. I, Weston, am your God and your devil. I call that force into me completely. Okay? And at that point, his face kind of changes and a bunch of things happen. Why is that necessary? Satan has to get a foothold. He's just been invited. That breaks the barrier between Earth and Venus by being invited in. Okay? Now at this point, a bunch of things are going to start happening. They're going to talk. Ransom, Weston goes through these convulsions. Ransom, being the good Christian he is, tries to help him, takes a bottle of that Maker's Mark over there, puts the thing in his mouth, and he chomps down and bites it. Breaks the glass. Ransom thinks, oh my God, I've killed him. But he hasn't. Unfortunately. Or fortunate, one of the two. Chapter 8 begins with Ransom. He woke after a disturbed and dreamful sleep in full daylight. He had a dry mouth, a crick in his neck, and a soreness in his limbs. Why? This is the first time he's had any of these experiences on Perelandra. Because evil is entered. And the experience of life on earth is now going to start being transferred to Perelandra. The longer this kind of goes on, the more those experiences will occur. It was so unlike all previous awakenings in the world of Venus. There was an earlier time he woke up. He woke up, and he's totally refreshed, and he sees this dragon curled around a tree. And he's immediately led to the old Greek myth of the Garden of the Hesperides. You know, the Western Isle where the Hesperides women, goddesses, live, and they tend the apples of Hera or Juno, whichever one you want to refer it to. And he's like, this is like a myth. And he wonders, are all earthly myths reality somewhere else? Well, that idea is going to come back fairly shortly. Now, I've written at the top of this page, in a sense, he has experienced the fall. Ransom has. Remember, prior to this, he was like a new man. Now, he must overcome. That is, now, Ransom must somehow do what? Do what Adam and Eve couldn't do. He's got to repair what's broken. He has to do what? He has to ransom this world. He doesn't know it yet, but it's going to come very quickly. So the next several chapters are going to be the temptation. Essentially 8 through 10 are going to be the temptation of the Green Lady. Although I'd love to spend a lot of time, we don't have a lot of time. So the unman, Weston, because he's no longer man, goes about the temptation in a couple of different ways. He starts off with the very blatant one. Well, why are you forbidden to sleep on the fixed land? Well, that's a stupid rule. But then he gets more subtle. Maybe Malodil wants you secretly to step outside his will, as she has already said she has experienced that she doesn't flow in his will, she walks alongside. Maybe he really wants you to step outside and do this. Why? One reason, so she can teach her husband. And to give him a possibility that maybe she's wrong, that he can say no. One of the things Milton raises is the possibility of Adam not eating the apple. Sorry, Eve. God told us, sucks to be you, you know. There were some Christian commentators who suggested, not a consensus or anything like that, if Adam had taken responsibility without eating the apple, God would have forgiven Eve. And the fall wouldn't have happened. It would have been aborted, you know, at that point. So that's another possibility. To build up in her this idea that she should do this, he starts working on what we would call her self-image. Why? Because she has no self-image. Literally, she has no self-image. She has not seen herself, like not even a clear pool of water. And he just so happens to have with him a mirror, so he can show her. And when she sees herself, she's astounded and frightened. Okay? What else does he do? He does something from Lewis's own conversion experience. He talks about stories. Making up things that haven't been, things that aren't true. Why? Because they bring us mirth, they bring us joy. And she's like, but how can they bring us mirth and joy if they haven't happened and if they're not real? He said, because they bring up what? The thing that Lucy experiences in Voyage of the Dawn Treader. The what might have beens. Lewis, I think I mentioned this in a previous talk, Lewis said to Tolkien in a letter, poetry is nothing more than lies breathed through silver. Odyssey, Beowulf, Dante's Divine Comedy. They're just lies. They're beautiful lies. They're great lies, Hamlet. But they're breathed through silver. That is, the silver makes them attractive and beautiful. Did Hamlet really live? Probably not. Did Odysseus? Probably. Therefore, they're lies. Tolkien was like, no, that's not what's going on. But that's what the unman attempts to use with her. His final pitch, okay? And this is why we're going to skip over most of the actual temptation. His final pitch is to create in her a sense of the theatric, a sense of the tragic, the dramatic. Like she will become some great, it's hard to think of because of the world she's in and the fact that she is a queen. She will become some great, tragic, heroic queen, like Cleopatra or Dido, in the story of Dido and Aeneas in Carthage, that she will suffer great things. Why? For the good of her husband and her children, so that they won't suffer those things. It's at the end of that part of the temptation that we see, hold on 1 second, Ransom. This is end of chapter 10. Ransom realizes something's got to be done. Very last page of chapter 10. The last paragraph, not quite halfway down. The expression of her face was noble. It was a great deal too noble. Greatness, tragedy, high sentiment. These were obviously what occupied her thoughts. Ransom perceived that the affair of the robes, the unman had made her a robe of bird feathers. She didn't realize he killed the birds. He said, oh, I found them. He's been killing little animals ever since he became the unman. The incident of the robes and the mirror had been only superficially connected with what is commonly called female vanity. The image of her beautiful body had been offered to her only as a means to awake the far more perilous image of her great soul. The external and, as it were, dramatic conception of the self was the enemy's true aim. He was making her mind a theater in which that phantom self should hold the stage. He had already written the play. He, the unman. Notice, however, pause for a second, turn the page. Had the unman written all of the play? He only arrived when? If in a 5-act play, around Act 3. Acts 1 and 2 were what? Ransom and the lady. And Ransom prepared the lady by getting her to think ideas she had never thought before. Most of those ideas are, so to speak, blessed by God. Why? Because Malodil speaks to her and explains and clarifies. But not all of them. All right? Then we come to chapter 11. Chapter 11 is entirely about Ransom. And this is why, I think this is ultimately why Lewis wrote the entire novel. He wanted to get to this. He wanted to explain these ideas to his readers. All right? Second paragraph, last sentence. He could not understand why Malodil should remain absent when the enemy was there in person. I mean, Satan's there. Where's Malodil? Oh, the presence hovering, Why isn't he speaking to her? Because almost throughout all of the conversation with the unman, Maladil is okay. I mentioned Lewis is kind of rewriting somewhat of at least the portrayal of God in Paradise Lost. In Paradise Lost, God is very present. Here's a little example. We see Satan after he's been cast out of heaven. Book 3, I think it is. Satan is chained onto the lake of fire. I mean, it's like young Frankenstein, put the candle back in the bookcase. His face is pushed down on the lake of fire. Beelzebub's there with him and stuff. And they're sitting there talking, and Satan, I could do all this stuff. But he can't. Meanwhile, up in heaven, God's on his throne. And God looks down at Satan, and he sees Satan, and Satan's down there and says, if God would let me up, boy, I'd give him one. And God smiles. And Satan rises. And there are several instances like that where Satan, if only and God's kind of like, go ahead. It's what? It's the prologue to Job. Okay? The difference is, in Paradise Lost, according to William Blake, the author I mentioned before, Songs of Innocence and Songs of Experience, Blake said Milton was secretly part of Satan's party. He liked Satan. Why? Satan in Paradise Lost, there's no other way of looking at it. Satan is the hero, man. Satan is the tragic hero. Satan, he can rouse troops. You think Henry V's speech in, Shakespeare's play is a rabble. He just rouses his troops like nobody else can. Okay, Blake was entirely wrong about that. Milton had other things going on with that idea. One of the things Lewis said in the preface to Paradise Lost is, people don't like Milton's portrayal of God because people don't like God. This is an academic publication. Nice little thin book, Cambridge University Press. He said they don't like God. They don't like the portrayal of providence, power, order, etc. So he doesn't show God, Lewis, in that sense. We don't see God. We hear about God. We hear what God has spoken to the Green Lady. Okay? In this chapter, it's the closest we come to seeing/hearing God. So, Ransom is separated from the Green Lady in Weston, and he's asking, where are you, God? He knew that Maladil was not absent. That sense, so very welcome, yet never welcome without the overwhelming presence, that sense of the presence, which he had once or twice before experienced, returned to him. The darkness was packed quite full. Moreover, he was aware in some indefinable fashion that it had never been absent. God's always been there. That only some unconscious activity of his own had succeeded in ignoring it for the past few days. Why an unconscious activity of his own? What's been going on the past few days? The unmanned interviews with the Green Lady, and Ransom's attempts to intervene. And he got a couple good shots in. The unmanned said, it was because of me, essentially, that Maladil became a man in your world. Do you deny it? And Ransom says, no, I don't deny it. Tell me, how much joy did you get from that? And he howls. Okay? That's essentially the point of separation. So what was the unconscious activity that didn't allow him to experience the presence? This was where? It wasn't here. It didn't descend. He didn't descend into the heart that St. Theophan says one must do to have that experience. It was, say it again?
Rationality.
His reason was kicked into high gear. Why does Dante only allow Virgil to lead him to the top of purgatory and not into paradise? Virgil's not a Christian. Virgil is the highest that reason can give you, can bring you. He leads him all the way through hell. He leads him all the way through the 7 levels of purgatory, and he has to stop there at the river that separates purgatory to what's beyond in the blessed realm. Okay? That reason only gets you so far. Then what has to take over? Faith. Faith. And Virgil doesn't. Virgil does at that point. Virgil knows the truth. But he didn't have faith here on earth. Okay? He's not aware of why this is happening. But the enemy, top of 141, is really here, really saying and doing things. Where is Maladil's representative? What does this tell us about ransom? Be honest. I can see a couple of facial expressions are telling me. A little thick.
Very corporeal.
Yeah, he is Maladil's representative. Who sent him there? One of Maladil's angels. Not just any little low everyday garden variety 7-Eleven angel. A ruling planetary intelligence. I mean, powerful angel. Why? To be an observer? He keeps thinking, I've done it all. I've done all I can. I've talked till I'm sick of it. It's no good, I tell you. He tried to persuade himself. He ransom. He could probably be Maladil's. He could not be Maladil's representative, as the young man was the representative of hell. He's trying to convince himself he's not. Why?
Requires a sacrifice.
Or requires something. Might be sacrifice, might be something else. He was horrified when the darkness simply flung back this argument in his face, almost impatiently. It doesn't answer the argument. It's not like Job. God shows him, whirlwinds and snows and, It just throws it right back. It's like he says it and it bounces. And then he wondered how it had escaped him till now. He was forced to perceive that his own coming to Perelandra was at least as much of a marvel as the enemy's. He himself was the miracle. Let's use other language. He himself was the incarnation. He was the ransom. But this is nonsense. Okay, sorry. Because he feels that presence. He had been brought here miraculously. He was in God's hands. And he thinks, well, as long as I do my best, that's all God wants. He had not succeeded, but he'd done his best, No one could do more. 'Tis not in mortals to command success, he thinks. Fate of Venus, that could not really rest upon his shoulders. It was in God's hands. God's in control, One must be content to leave it there. One must have faith. As we've said several times, what does ransom mean by that? He does not mean it snapped like a violin string. That is that thought, that defense that he was creating. Not one rag of all this evasion was left. Relentlessly, unmistakably, the darkness pressed down upon him the knowledge that this picture of the situation was utterly false. If the issue lay in Maladil's hands, Ransom and the lady were those hands. That's it. The fate of a world really depended on how they behaved in the next few hours. The thing was irreducible. The thing was irreducibly, nakedly real. They could, if they chose, decline to save the innocence of this new race, and if they declined, its innocence would not be saved. It rested with no other creature in all time or all space. In other words, if they didn't do it, it would fall. What was the sense of so arranging things that anything really important should finally and absolutely depend on such a man of straw as himself? Ransom thinks. It's like, what are you doing, God? And at that moment, far away on earth, he thinks, what? As he now could not help remembering, men were at war. And white-faced subalterns and freckled corporals who had but lately begun to shave stood in horrible gaps or crawled forward in deadly darkness, awaking like him to the preposterous truth that all really depended on their actions. Now, I can't, never having been in the military, I can't help but think that only someone who had been in war could write that, as Lewis was in World War I. And he thinks back not only to them, Lewis was a classic scholar, and he goes back to Honorius at the bridge. He goes back to Constantine at the Milvain Bridge. And he thinks of all of these battles where essentially one person, and he thinks, a stone may determine the course of a river. He was that stone at this horrible moment, which had become the center of the whole universe. Now, this is an idea, an image that's going to be brought up in the great dance idea. Okay? At the end. The ideal of all worlds, the sinless organisms of everlasting light were silent in deep heaven to see what Elwyn Ransom of Cambridge would do. There's a passage in Paradise Lost just like that. When Adam and Eve are on the verge of being tempted, I think it's Paradise Lost, might be Paradise Regained, where there's silence in heaven for 30 minutes. And then the son steps forward and says, I will go. Okay? Time's all messed up, but we won't talk about that. So Ransom starts thinking about, okay, so I'm the representative. I've got to stop him. How am I going to do that? Middle of 143. Stood to reason. Struggle with the devil means what? Spiritual. We wage not war with flesh and blood, Paul writes. It's spiritual powers, thrones, dominant, etc. The notion of a physical combat was only fit for a savage. I mean, how gauche. Really, I mean. And yet, Weston is what? Living, breathing, physical thing. Where does the real unman reside? Within. Take the host away. Ransom decreed, bottom of 143, whatever the silence and the darkness seemed to be saying about this, no such crude materialistic struggle could possibly be what Maladil really intended. No. It would degrade the spiritual warfare to the condition of mere mythology. And then Lewis uses one of the most enigmatic passages in all of his writing. I had a student write a dissertation on this. Sucker was 600 pages on this one passage. But here he got another check. Long since on Mars, and more strongly since he came to Perelandra, Ransom had been perceiving that the triple distinction, two corners bent back on this page, the triple distinction of truth from myth and of both from fact was purely terrestrial. The distinction of myth from truth and both of those from fact That's a distinction that only occurs here. Out there, myth, truth, in fact, they're all the same thing. What does he mean? It was part and parcel of that unhappy division between soul and body which resulted from the fall. Why? Because our soul has been separated from our bodies, not literally, figuratively, so that we don't perceive the way we are meant to perceive. Even on earth, the sacraments existed as a permanent reminder that the division was neither wholesome nor final. Why? Because of what is meant by sacrament. It is something that imparts grace. It is a physical thing that has what? A spiritual component to it. The incarnation had been the beginning of its disappearance. In Perelandra, it would have no meaning at all. That is, the triple distinction of myth from truth from fact. Whatever happened here would be of such a nature that earthmen would call it mythological. Okay? He keeps thinking. And what I mean by he keeps thinking, he keeps delaying. He knows what he must do, but he doesn't want to do it. I don't want that wave. He wants another wave, a smaller wave. Bottom of 144. Every minute it became clearer to him that the parallel he had tried to draw between Eden and Perelandra was crude and imperfect. This is why I made my little comment in the blurb about people have said that this is about the retelling of Eden. It's not. What had happened on earth when Maladil was born a man at Bethlehem had altered the universe forever. Maladil never repeated himself. If Perelandra fell, something else would happen in order to redeem it. If we think what happened on earth was astounding and amazing and something that even the angels desired to look into, what would happen on Perelandra would be even more inexplicable, more non-understandable.
You said it would take something greater.
Exactly. So, Ransom comes to the conclusion, 145, towards that bottom. This can't go on. The stopping of a third-degree solicitation, already more than once refused, was a problem to which the terrestrial fall offered no clue. Why? What do we get in the Genesis story? Look, Eve, it's it's desirable to the eyes, it'll make you wise, and you won't die. It's like, well, okay then. Just goes and takes a bite. There's no indication of temptation after temptation after temptation, of Will being beaten, until she has to give in. That's what's happening here. Ransom says, I've got to stop it. Or, this can't go on. Notice the voice in grammar. Talk about active voice, passive voice. This can't go on. That means someone needs to stop this. You or not me. And now he realizes that someone is himself. He starts to think, okay, Weston's body can be destroyed. He's faced with the impossible, middle of 147, exact middle of 147. It is not for nothing that you are named Ransom. Which is interesting, and many people have pointed out it's a flaw, because we're told in the first book, his real name isn't Elwin Ransom. It's a pseudonym that Lewis gives him. And here we're told, it really is Elwin Ransom. The name Elwin, by the way, friend of angels, is what that means. It's Old English. Okay? So, Ransom, so he takes that. My name is Ransom. My ancestors are named Ransom. Really, it's just a pun to say that it means that, my life or theirs or whatever. At the bottom of that page, The whole distinction between things accidental and things designed. Now I'm going to go from this almost straight to the great dance. The whole distinction between things accidental and things designed, like the distinction between fact and myth, was purely terrestrial. Okay? The distinction between things accidental and things designed. There is no distinction. The pattern is so large that within the little frame of earthly experience there appear pieces of it between which we can see no connection, and other pieces between which we can. Step outside the frame and the distinction drops down into the void. What does he mean? He had been forced out of the frame, caught up into the larger pattern. He knew now why the old philosophers had said there is no such thing as chance or fortune beyond the moon. What's he talking about? In ancient Greek, Roman philosophy and literature, our world, everything from the moon down to here, is governed by chance and fortune, the goddess fortune. Everything outside the moon, you have fate involved, okay, in the Greek system. In the Christian system, you've got fate, but you also have providence, and then God. So you have God, providence, fate, fortune, and then us down here, and we're like, puppets at the end of a marionette string, okay? What he is saying here is this idea that Boethius propounded in the Consolation of Philosophy. Boethius, 6th century Roman philosopher, statesman, knew everything, translated Greek literature, fathers of the church into Roman, etc., etc. Good friends with the Roman emperor at that time, who was Theodoric, a Germanic Goth. Someone told Theodoric, Boethius is plotting against you. He's going to kill you. Theodoric believed him. He put Boethius in prison. Capital punishment. He did eventually die. He had leather thongs wrapped around his head and the water poured on them. Leather shrinks when it gets wet until his head exploded. That's historical fact. While in prison, Boethius wrote a little book called The Consolation of Philosophy. A lot of people have problems with it because it's not the consolation of Christianity. He is writing how philosophy can console those who are going through hard times. And he creates a story of the goddess philosophy comes to him when he's saying, why me, God? And says, well, you haven't learned your lesson very well now, have you? So let's sit down and go over it. And through 5 books, she explains why, title of a book in the mid-'80s by a Jewish rabbi, I had his name just a second ago, why bad things happen to good people. His son died.
Kushner.
Yeah, Harold Kushner, I think. The thrust of Boethius' point is, he has a whole bunch of little arguments. I've got a long series on YouTube from a class I did on this. His thrust is, we down here need to learn to see our lives the way God sees them. How does God see our lives? You used the term earlier. The eternal now. For God, who is outside all time, outside all place, all time and place are essentially a point. A point. The eternal now. So when God created, beginning, end, all of it created. What does that do for human free will? When God created, God knew. Why? Because God knows everything. What would happen if he were to create a world such as ours? And because at the moment of considering creating, God saw what we would do. Okay? And it's that eternal present, it's that bird's eye view of seeing everything that does what? Allows, if we can attempt to achieve that view, to see how the elements of our life do what? Become like a jigsaw puzzle that is slowly being put together. Or the image I like to use, much, much better to me, a tapestry. You can look at a tapestry two ways. You can look at the front side that you're supposed to look at, or you can flip it over and look at the back. And what is it? It's chaos. There's loose threads going and it doesn't make any sense. But the tapestry, when seen the way it's supposed to be seen, is beautiful. Every thread has a point and purpose. And those threads are you, me, all the people we come into, etc., etc. That is what Ransom has come to understand. What he thought was an accident, first chapter, his being kidnapped and taken to Malacandra, not an accident. He didn't know it at the time, now he does, okay? So, he goes on and says, before his mother had been before him, before his ancestors had been called ransoms, before ransom had been the name for a payment, before the world was made, all these things had so stood together in eternity that the very significance of the pattern at this point lay in their coming together in just this fashion. In other words, all of that came together for what? For this moment. Well, that's kind of hubristic, isn't it? No. So, skip the next section, the battle with the unman. Why? He kills him, bashes his head in. He will crush your head, and Ransom gets a bite on his heel that never stops bleeding. Okay? He buries Weston, gives him a nice little headstone kind of a thing, and he comes out from under the ground. He's in these dark caverns. This is the soul going down to death, the rising up. You have a baptism element, birth, death, and rebirth. Climbs up to the top of this mountain. It's like the mountain of purgatory. He sees Tor Tenedril, the king and queen. He sees Malacandra and Perelandra, and he experiences what is called the Great Dance. The Great Dance is what? It's not complete, what he sees. It's a portion. He sees Perelandra, the world, wake up. It's the first day. It's the day it was intended to be. Perelandra does what did not happen on Earth. It will at some point in the future, okay? But Perelandra has this awakening. And he sees the Oyerisu take a form that he can understand and stuff. And he talks with them, and they explain. And he sees Tor and Tenedril, the king and queen, start naming things. Adam and Eve all over. Why? Because whatever they say goes. They are now essentially the Oyarsa of the planet. They are the ruling intelligences. In the old Greek system, in the Platonic version, the Christian Neoplatonic version of the Greek conception of the universe, where you had the 9 concentric spheres. Each one of those spheres had a ruling intelligence, an angelic being that governed it. Okay? They are now those for Perelandra. Adam and Eve were supposed to be those for our world. Mars had its, okay, essentially. Yarsa was. He sees all this, and he hears this song going on, and he doesn't know if he's waking or sleeping because time flows in and out, and he's not aware of it. And what he experiences is ultimately this. Every point is the center. What do I mean by that? God is everywhere present and filleth all things. Therefore, everywhere God is the center. You know, critics of Dante have suggested, it kind of stinks to be one of the less blessed, because the vision of heaven, there's 9 levels of heaven. You've got the lowest level. That's where, if I'm lucky, I go. And you have the highest level. Those who are in the mystic rows, sitting there beholding the beatific vision. Well, even those in the lowest level of heaven, are beholding the beatific vision. It's just they're not as blessed as the others are, but they don't feel less blessed. Why? They're in the direct presence of God. They don't experience any less of the presence of God. Only those who are right, Mary, the apostles, the patriarchs, etc. Okay? Ransom experiences essentially that at the end of this novel. Why? It's part of that, what I said at the beginning. Out of the Silent Planet is kind of his purification. But I think that's continuing into this. Why? He has to be purified of his wrong ideology. His ideology being reason can answer everything. He's got to lose that. He also has to be purified of his errors. Okay? And he's illumined now to this point where he can see this and experience it. The deification part, if that happens in that hideous strength. I think it does because of what happens with Ransom at the end. Okay, I'm going to stop there because it went a lot longer than I had intended. As some of you know me, you're not surprised. Questions? There should be a mic around there still somewhere. 2 hours and 36 minutes. Yes?
You mentioned something really curious that just flew by.
It probably just flew in and flew by. So
You mentioned something about a passage where the woman mentions waves being different, big and small. Like I do is like diving into waves. But I went around the page. That's something I want to go back.
Oh.
Is there a phrase I could use to search and find that?
yeah, it's before the passage with Weston. I want to say it's in chapter 5. How can one wish? Probably around 68 and following, I would think. A wave so swift and great that all your force was too little? Or how can one wish any of those waves not to reach us which Maladil is rolling towards us? It's on those pages that she's kind of talking about.
No, you're talking about the time and the dimension, linear links, and
That's earlier.
standing in it and in front of it and behind it. I think is when he.
Yeah, it's just a curious side because it's the science of waves is a very intricate thing, and I'm just curious whether that informed constructing his.
Yeah, it's probably still in chapter 5 somewhere. Is my guess.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
A question about the fixed island and the floating islands. Do you see the idea of the fixed and floating islands? Do you see any symbolism there in the fixed and floating?
Well, I mean, yeah, because fixed means it's controlled. There's no quote unquote chance. The very fact that the floating islands are moving around, she gets separated from her husband because islands float. And so she goes up, they go onto the fixed land, she suggests, so that she can look out and try to see him. Which in one sense is it's kind of a getting a little bit towards maybe wanting some control. But she says we cannot stay here and such. Meanwhile, Ransom wants to, park and camp. Other than that, being on the floating islands means being entirely existing at Malido's pleasure,
Just-
rolling with.
What you said there made me just have the thought that the fixed island is static and the floating islands are moving and life is moving. Death is homeostasis.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, one's dynamic and one is not.
Not a question as much as a comment. But I found it interesting the language of declaring everything the unman is, like I am, is a direct inversion of God's revelation to Moses on Sinai, right? That language of I am, like I have to think that's intentional because it's a demonic inversion, which is what we do all the time when we say we can decide who's a man or woman, we can decide all these things. We're essentially making the exact same declaration that's the inversion of God's revelation to Moses.
I've got a talk I haven't prepared. It's something I've been thinking of years. You know, actually I've thought of a book, but I'll never do it because I'm too lazy. You know, the new iconoclasm. And the new iconoclasm is something that began late 19th century, accelerated through the 20th century, and just went on steroids this century. This idea of breaking down every order so that man is no longer man, man can now be woman, woman can be man. Good is no good and evil, I mean everything. Applying illogical, non-physical processes, for example, to building bridges. I mean, to where bridges have got to be, I won't even go into it. DEI, you know, and all that kind of stuff.
Inclusive bridges?
Inclusive bridges, inclusive roadway, etc. And it's an attempt, I think, and this kind of gets at that hideous strength. The macrobes are real. The spiritual powers are so real, and they have been, the last 20 years, and I've seen this more and more because of being a professor, the change in students in 30 years is unbelievable. When I first started teaching in Mississippi, you know, I had students who I could count on some kind of biblical knowledge, and in the last couple of years, you know, out of maybe 100 students in a semester or 50 students a semester, you know, maybe 2 or 3, and those 2 or 3 will come up afterwards. Thank you so much. You know, it's like a lifeline in, you know, the morass of filth. Yeah, there is a very, very powerful act of destruction of all symbols. Chip, did you have? Oh, you do.
So, thinking about you know the previous novel and its relationship to this one, I guess you know there's this sort of reference to the idea of Mars as having a masculine aspect to it, and this being you know the planet we know as Venus having a feminine aspect to it. I presume Lewis is intentionally playing with these aspects in some way. But, you know, is there any importance to the notion that we start with kind of the masculine notion and then we move to the feminine, kind of in Ransom's journey towards, you know, the ultimate deification, I guess, that we see in his journey over the course of these novels, or is that incidental?
No, it's not incidental. There's a long passage in this novel. It's 2 or 3 pages long. I think it's 2, maybe only 2 or 3 paragraphs. It's a long passage where he goes into a whole philosophical discussion regarding gender and what gender is and what gender really means. And I did not reread that passage today. It's pretty mind-blowing because, I mean, gender has nothing to do with physiology. And he tries to make that extremely clear. It has much more to do with experience, perception. It's almost like to use a very poor analogy, the difference between myth and truth. Almost like, it's a poor analogy because I'm not saying like femininity is like myth and masculinity is like truth. It's not that, but It's the best I could think of off the top of my head, because again, I did not reread that passage because I didn't want to discuss it. There are a lot of things Lewis says that are, I mean,
Will you please come back and do that hideous strength?
Yeah.
I love Lewis. I see this book as a lot of him struggling with his own problem with free will and sovereignty. That the waves come and who would buck those waves. And Ransom is going to be on his way to be this kind of Christ figure or whatever. Do you think C.S. Lewis always thought that the Till We Have Faces was his greatest work, and I don't get it at all. But Space Trilogy,
I think he's exactly right.
But I think the Space Trilogy is my favorite of them all. If I was writing a science fiction story today, and I am a writer, I've done 22 graphic novels, I would be wrong about almost everything in trying to guess what we're grasping at today. How do you explain that he came out of modernism and he's talking about postmodernism and he just nails everything to the wall, including Weston going from being a materialist to some kind of a spiritualist? What's your explanation for how...
He was a prophet.
Yeah, how did he get it right?
Well, I'd say a lot of that was due to his background and his academic training, reading the classic, first in honors, first in the classics, then literature. His coming to Christianity from being not just a namby-pamby atheist, from being a pretty staunch atheist. When his mother died, it turned him against God. And how he came to Christianity, first via George MacDonald, baptizing his imagination so that he gets this idea that stories can be more true. And then the talk with Tolkien and Hugo Dyson on Addison's Walk, and Tolkien getting him to see that Christianity is a myth that's true. That's the core of this. When he talks about myth, truth, fact, he says, and myth became fact. An essay, that's something I've got in my notes here. The thing about Christianity is it is a myth, but it is true, and it factually occurred. And that's what makes everything in it resonate.
And what about him being a supernaturalist or a spiritualist?
Well, yeah,
Is that also what Weston is in this book?
To some extent. And he could be also tying a little bit into that the character friend, Charles Williams. Charles Williams was really into esoteric philosophy and some pretty dangerous stuff. But Charles Williams also was very grounded in what Lewis would call mere Christianity. Resurrection, the incarnation, the whole 9 yards. No, I honestly, I think Lewis was raised for such a time. Because in one sense, he was the only person who could do what he did then. In another sense, I'll go back to Flannery O'Connor did the same in the 50s, but from a Catholic perspective. And Lewis wasn't, one of the things I think most people who love about Lewis is he's not doctrinal. He doesn't espouse doctrines. He gets to core truths, so to speak. Yeah. The comment about the Space Trilogy and he's wrestling with things. Lewis was wrestling with things from his first work of fiction, not the poetry, Pilgrim's Regress, all the way to his last. And I think the things that Lewis ultimately is wrestling with, and I'm not the first person to say this, Peter Shackle talked about this in a book, Reason and Imagination, in C.S. Lewis. He lives his mind is of two parts. rational, emotional. And he's trying to synthesize those two. He's trying to syncretize those two. His early work is highly rational. I mean, even Screw Tape. Miracle, problem of pain. He thinks he's going to solve the problem of pain in a little book. And then he meets Joy Davidman, who gets cancer and goes and dies on him. And he's really angry at God. Read it, Grief Observed. Whew. That is the words of an angry, angry man. But I think he reached it. I did, this was my first talk here, 15 years ago, 12 years ago or so. He reaches that fusion of sorts in Till We Have Faces, where he realizes, suggests, reason gets you this far, the heart has to be there too. And ultimately it becomes, in this book, that 80 Strength, it's about humility. They're ultimately about being humble before God, submitting, not saying, like Weston says, I'm the greatest scientist ever. I mean, Lewis could have said, I'm the greatest critic of allegorical literature. Because a lot of people say he was, but he never,
He was smarter than everyone.
That's why a lot of people didn't like him.
He knew it bought him nothing.
Yeah. Yep.
You mentioned that Lewis contrasts the devil in Milton, or the whole story of Milton, where really the devil is, there's something admirable about him. There's something like the whole brain in hell rather than sort of heaven. Is part of that contrast the unman and just like how interesting he is?
Yeah, he takes the character of Satan in Paradise Lost and turns him into the unman. You don't see Satan. Milton does have Satan look like a toad. That part usually gets glossed over when people say, "Oh, Satan's this great heroic figure" and stuff. But he makes him the unman in this because what is man? Made in the image and likeness of God. And he is what? He is the opposite of that. And yet Satan at his creation was what? He is the highest of the angelic order. I mean, this is going to sound heretical. I do not mean it to be. There is a reason why he said, I will be like God. He thought, well, it's not that big a leap. Of course, the chasm was unbridgeable, but that's his hubris, yeah. Go.
One
Go
last
ahead.
one. We know that Tolkien did not care for some of the
Thank you.
allegories in Lewis's work, particularly.
Oh, he hated it.
Of course, Lewis wrote the Space Trilogy as part of the wager.
Yeah.
Which Tolkien did not fulfill his side of the wager. What did Tolkien think of the Space Trilogy?
Yeah, I honestly don't know. I don't think I've ever. I can't think, and having read most of the letters, I can't think of a single letter where he talks about the Space Trilogy. There might be one to Lewis, but I'm not familiar with it. I'll step out on a limb. He probably wouldn't like it because of the mixture of mythic elements. That's why he did not like Narnia. How in the world can you have Father Christmas in Narnia when there's no Christmas in Narnia? You're mixing mythological images, and Tolkien was such a purist. The world that is created has to be internally coherent, because once you do something that makes it slightly, the whole thing just bursts.
I felt like I read somewhere that he liked the first two books, but not the last.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me either. I mean, Tolkien liked science fiction. He liked space travel stories. So, All right, we'll stop
you so
there
much.
since everybody wants to go to bed. Sorry, Tom.